We are awaiting news on who will occupy the White House, as this will have a direct impact on U.S. trade policy. And our next guest will discuss the likely impact on world trade under the next Commander-in-Chief. Welcome back to Asia First. Let's get you a check on the Asia-Pacific markets. It is green across the board from Tokyo to Sydney. The outperformer at the moment seems to be South Korea's Kospi, 1.4% high. Even Australia's ASX 200 is rebounding from the negative close of yesterday's session. And remember, Tokyo's Nikkei showed gains of almost 2% yesterday. It is piling on to that, 0.9% stronger on the Nikkei 225. Let's check in on the U.S. futures. They were struggling a little bit to build on Wall Street's rally overnight. We did see initially the Nasdaq futures surging forward, and then it pared back a bit of those gains. But now it seems that it's broadly positive on the Dow, S&P 500, and the Nasdaq futures. We'll see if they'll be able to sustain this for the rest of the session. Now, for more on the markets, the U.S. elections and economy, including trade policy from whoever takes place in the White House going forward, Tony Nash, founder and CEO at Complete Intelligence, joins us from Houston, Texas. So, Tony, you know, it's been a very divisive election, and I don't know, at this point, is it worth looking back at how there was gridlock and, you know, it was difficult for Congress to push forward any form of stimulus, leaving a lot of Americans out in the cold. I don't know if this weighed on the minds of voters that maybe Congress, the whole of Congress, was complicit in this issue. But where do you think, you know, paving the way forward for the American economy needs to start?
Yeah, Errol, thanks. I think it really depends on where in America you are. There are parts of America that just can't wait to get out and work, and there are restrictions. There are other parts of America where people want to stay in under restrictions, and generally that's the red-blue divide in the U.S. What we've seen is more people wanting to push out demonstrations in, say, California and other places where people just want to get out. So I think the stimulus issues with Congress, there were a number of windows where stimulus could have come out, but it didn't. And that was a lever that was pulled largely by the House of Representatives before the election. They wanted to hold off from it. And yes, I think especially business owners, very frustrated by that. People who have been laid off, very frustrated by that. So I think certainly some of this has been a part of the voting consideration.
You know, Tony, both sides, red and blue, are blaming each other on why stimulus was difficult and not being pushed forward before the election. But I want to get to the issue of the backbone of some of the sectors of the economy. In this election, climate change featured very heavily. You come from an oil state. The bigger question now going forward is, because of this increasing climate consciousness, if you like, can these sectors actually pivot away from oil without causing huge disruption, political and economic?
Yeah, I think that's fine. In terms of climate change, the U.S. actually performed very well in terms of emissions and efficiency. I think the bigger issue for these oil companies is actually the inefficiencies of their organizations. And we've seen a lot of oil companies come out to say that they'd be laying off, say, 15–16% of their global workforce. And so they're realizing that with oil prices where they are and gas prices where they are, they just can't sustain the bloated workforces that they've had to date. So yes, climate change is an issue, and that's a consideration. But with the fossil fuel companies, they've had bloated workforces that they're having to contend with now that oil prices are lower.
As we look back at what the Trump administration set out to achieve with its very aggressive trade policy, based on the metrics of, you know, leveling or gaining leverage to negotiate better terms for trade deals, do you think it has achieved this?
I think what the current administration has been doing is a long game. It's not something that is, say, a short-term plan. To get factories to move, to get capital investment, to get, say, supply chains to move, that's a 3 to 5 to 10-year process and can be even longer for industries that have super heavy capital investment. So I think, yes, I think it's making progress. If you look at investment, say, in electronic supply chains going into Mexico, I think both the aggressive nature toward China and the USMCA have really helped the electronics industry come back to Mexico and to the US. So I think those are some of the faster moving industries where we're starting to see some real traction. But it is a long game. It's something that if that's dialed back now, you won't necessarily see that continue, or you may not see that continue.
But you know, the way that the Trump administration upended NAFTA, it does seem that it antagonized some of its closest security partners, including Canada. Is it counterproductive, you think, to trying to form an alliance to counter the rise of China?
Well, there are two things. With the USMCA, the kind of NAFTA Part 2, there was an agreement among the partners that it was a much better agreement. So I think getting them to the negotiating table was the first hurdle. But once they realized what the U.S. wanted to do, what I understand is all sides were very, very happy, especially Mexico. But in terms of kind of getting a coalition against China together, I don't think the U.S. has necessarily tried to do that. I think the U.S. has understood that where there are multilateral organizations or multilateral relationships kind of countering China, that China will peel off one or two or three to create division. And so the U.S. has taken China on one-on-one. This was a strategy from the very beginning, and it's yielded some of the results. But again, it's a longer-term strategy that they've tried to undertake.
Hey, Tony, I appreciate your time with us today, talking through all things from the election politics and how it might affect the economy as well as trade policy going forward in the next 4 years. Tony Nash, founder and CEO, Complete Intelligence.